morning, Jeff.
Morning, Michael.
How
Can't
are ya?
believe it's doing good. I can't believe it's already July.
And episode 4 today of Know
And
Your
episode
World. So
4.
we've got 3 of them already in the hopper. Today we have a very special guest from one of our favorite partners, Alaris Acquisitions. We will let Jacqueline introduce herself. But let's show her slide right now. We'll get into this. Good morning.
Morning, Jacqueline.
How's it going?
We're great. How are you doing?
So good. I'm really excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this all week.
So have we. We really appreciate you taking time to join us today. This is one we've had circled and been excited about ever since we kind of first threw your name out there. So we really appreciate this. And I will let you introduce yourself, but we'll get into the meat of this here in a moment. So Jacqueline, how can people find you? How do they know you? Where do you come from? How did we get here?
How do we get here? Perfect. So Jacqueline Martinez, I'm managing partner at Alaris Acquisitions. I've been doing this here for about 3.5 years now. But prior to that, you may know me from my days at United Capital. I would call it the 5 years leading up to the sale to Goldman Sachs. I co-led our M&A team. So very similar to the work that you and Jeff do today for one company on the buy side, and did that leading up until our sale to Goldman Sachs. Stayed on for a few years and then decided would really love to get into something more entrepreneurial. My business partner and our CEO at Alaris, Alan Darby, we worked together now for close to 10 years. So we're just great partners, have so much fun working together, and it was just a natural next step. So now fast forward, Alaris, we're going on our 44th closed acquisition in the matter of months. And we, stay on pace, 15 or so deals a year on average. And, just learning and growing and all the things that we learned from our United Capital days together, we've worked that into how we operate today. And I'm excited to share more about that.
And so United Capital, for the listeners that maybe are not familiar, because that's an older name. Everybody on our side of the table knows it, or maybe for advisors that don't, you guys, and I would say Hightower, were so early to the game in wealth management acquisition. Would you mind just real quick snippet? How many acquisitions did you guys do when you were part of United? And why is that important, I think, for a listener now to understand that story? Absolutely.
So in the full course of the history, we did close to 100 acquisitions, I believe. My tenure there was probably part of the last 40 acquisitions. So we grew from, nothing in 2005 to close to 26 billion when the sale to Goldman Sachs happened in 2019. So really being part of that journey and understanding from a buyer's side how important it is to get that cultural fit right, and what a cancer it can be in the organization when things aren't right. And Alan, our CEO, really honed that over time to make sure that the folks that we were bringing on, that they align to our core points of alignment so that the friction is less. There's always, a lot to work through, but being aligned on key things, we've just found really honing in on that makes a great partnership. And we've taken those lessons at Alaris here to really focus on understanding for all of the buyers that we work with, close to 70 now. We've taken time to really understand what those are for each of them, so that when we're making matches, that it has a great chance of success.
The mandatory points, sorry, Jeff, the mandatory points of alignment, we've stolen that nomenclature a little bit, or used that on our side a few times, because it is so right. If you get those points out in the open and you're aligned on those, then it usually goes well. If there's even one of them where you're not aligned, that's where we have a problem. So I appreciate that. And I'll also say you mentioned having fun in this. That passion comes through in the deals that we've been able to work together. You see engaged advisors and passion from your side of the table to making sure that they're working with the right potential buyer. And it's a lot of fun. It's different than a traditional auction process where it's submit the bid, highest bid moves on to the next round. Maybe then you get to meet everybody. Then you consummate a deal. You guys tend to lead with that culture first. So we really appreciate that. Sorry, Jeff.
Yeah. No, Michael, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. That's exactly what I was going to say is, I mean, Jacqueline used the word culture. And I think that that's just so important in our industry is making sure that you're aligned with the person who, whether you're buyer or seller that you're going into business with, that there is that sense of cultural alignment. And what I really love about Alaris Acquisitions is, and maybe other firms do this, but we get to see it directly with you guys, is you guys actually build a sim deck on the buyers as well to help with the process for the sellers. So maybe you can speak to how you guys are different from other firms out there and the process about going around kind of navigating the sellers in that process.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to. So yeah, to your point. So the norm really for like Alaris at our core, we are sell-side advisors exclusively dedicated to the wealth management space. Most of our competitors, they operate in what you're talking about there, a financial auction where you're getting through rounds based on your offer, kind of limited interaction with your prospective partner. And that's understandable because they're casting generally such a wide net that the deal fatigue that would happen at that early stage when we're just getting started would be incredible if you're spending hours and hours with each of the 20 plus buyers that they're going to market with. So and a lot of this comes from my experience being on the buy side where I didn't really enjoy that process of working with people that are doing, with sell-side advisors either. I felt like I was constantly bidding against myself, not really sure about the conviction that this firm would be a great addition to United Capital and things like that. And so when we formed Alaris, we were thinking, okay, we want to do this for more firms, but how can we do this in a way that kind of fixes those issues with the standard process? And so we've spent the last 4 years interviewing buyers. Michael, I know I've met so many folks on your team, all of our team at Alaris has, and we've done that with every buyer that we work with to really understand, when it comes to points of alignment, okay, what things will the advisor give up control over? Most people are happy to give up control over compliance and accounting and those types of things. But as we get closer to the client experience, that's where it gets a little tricky. And there are things that some folks want to centralize all of the investment management. Some folks want to have a new client experience that their next gen advisor can be trained to, but there's an existing client base that they don't want to disrupt. And so it's a very delicate balance of all of those trade-offs to have the right mix. And so we've done that work with all of the buyers that we work with. And then when we have a potential seller come through our funnel, we're getting really granular with them as well to understand what do they want life to look like on the other side of the transaction, and what kinds of things do you want to give up control over. Maybe you're happy to not have your team directly reporting to you anymore. Maybe you're really looking to get training expertise for your team, certain services that, now you want to offer tax prep to your clients. We go through a laundry list of items to really unpack that. And then we are matching based on things that the seller is saying are incredibly important to them and which buyers do those things really, really well. And so then with that match, I think if we're aligned on those core things that you can define and you can say, this is really important and they do this really well, and narrow to those, then the rest of it, that cultural experience, or cultural fit, which is kind of an elusive topic, it's really an experience that you have. Do you like these people? Do you trust them? Can I envision my team being happy here? It leaves that personal connection to be evaluated together. And by having limited introductions with only ones that those core points of alignment are in sync, then it allows for, okay, which firm out of these do you connect with the most?
Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to more often than not. And I know we've had a few conversations with Alan in particular where he's mentioned more often than not the top bid doesn't always win the deal. It is who they like and who they trust and who do you want to spend time with outside of a work relationship. And I part of what I love about our business that we're in is that it is so personal. We are not making widgets. The value an advisor brings to their clients is not specifically in the output of the financial plan. It's that relationship, and it's that goodwill between the two of them, and the trust between the two parties. And likewise, it's similar at an RIA or from the corporate side. We have to win that business from our advisors every single day, and we have to like them, and they have to like us. They have to believe that we're looking out for their best interests and their clients' best interests. So I can say, Alaris, there aren't bad first calls. There's not a situation on the phone and right off the bat, this is not a fit. We are not culturally aligned. They're looking for something different than what we provide.
Yeah, I mean,
appreciate that. That's been your experience.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah. I mean, I agree with Michael because your process really allows them to take a peek under the hood before even speaking to us, and with where you guys are able to kind of narrow down the playing field. I mean, most often than not, you have already identified a small group of potential buyers that are going to be a cultural alignment and good fit for your seller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate that. Sometimes it takes a little trial and error to get that matching right when we first get going, but I think we also have a big focus on the overall picture of the partnership. If you're accelerating through rounds and narrowing down just based on an initial offer, that's one thing, and maybe it will filter to that right cultural fit. But we're, to your point around, we give the sellers interviews that we've done with the whole management team, big write-ups on the services. They come in to an intro call with you, Michael and Jeff, and knowing all of the basics around it. It really helps accelerate the get to know you process. And then we're able in the background to remind the seller it's more than just the initial offer. It's that post-close quality of life. Are we really solving for the things that we set out to solve? And understand, of course, the economic components are very important, but we find that that the offers are great from the start because there's that conviction from the small group of buyers that this really is a great fit. So firms are putting their best foot forward versus like in a financial auction, it may take a couple of rounds until you're getting that access, until you're able to spend the time with them, and then really go for it when So,
yeah, I think, and I know we want to talk about transition, but I think what's sneaky smart about your guys' process is you make us fall in love with the prospect early on, so the offers reflect that. It's pretty hard to submit an underbid or a non-market rate offer if we've already gotten the chance to really fall in love with those people that are looking to us for a potential partnership. So it's a great model and we love it. And I'll also just say last sort of topic or last little point on this is we've learned from you. So there's been multiple occasions where we've changed strategy or our leadership team has taken the input of a firm such as yourself where we've been able to maybe become more flexible. I know Bert has talked about that an awful lot, our CEO. Implementing some of those things so that we have a wider or more a better market to go after than maybe the historical perfect fit for Carson. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the willingness to listen. All we really want is for firms that want to have a successful inorganic growth strategy that it is successful, and we're so thankful to be able to play a part in that. And we share feedback, whether it's solicited or not, but that buyers can then take in and say, okay, we're hearing from the market that changing just a couple of things would really put us in a better position. Can we get comfortable with that? Then the buyers can decide, is it something that we
Right.
want to change or not? But at least the feedback is there versus, and I think back to like my old days, I didn't get a lot of feedback. I heard when we got the deal or we didn't, but there wasn't really a lot of feedback often, and it's so insightful.
Yeah. It's sometimes those ones you lose are even more impactful because it certainly changes the approach the next time. If you take the feedback to heart and you do change direction, it makes the next one either a better fit because you've honed in on what you're looking for, or you have a higher likelihood to close because you've made a few changes to the approach. So I know today we really want to use your expertise in transition, but transition I think is a loose term. I mean, that's to me all of the different work streams that take place after a signed letter of intent. And we've had a conversation before. There's a lot of firms that are really good at dating. I think everybody's good at dating, wooing the potential seller and explaining why you might be a good fit for them if they are in fact a good fit. There's a lot of firms that do that really well. But I think where the real work starts is once that letter of intent, the LOI is signed, what happens between that and closing the deal? And if I am I'm an advisor that's thinking about going to market or hiring a firm like Alaris, what can I expect? What does the process look like? What does moving assets? What does working with an attorney? All of that. If you wouldn't mind just from your perspective, because you've done so many of these, what are things advisors should be thinking about? What should they expect? And then maybe like a few lessons that you've been able to learn over your career on where things can maybe go off the rails.
Yeah, for sure. It's a big topic, so we'll kind of take it. I know. I wish we had more time.
That's why we brought you in.
Well, I think that's right. There's so much excitement getting to the LOI moment, and it's, you kind of feel like sellers often feel like, wow, I've been through so much. I've already provided a lot of information. What more could they possibly want? But it's really where all of the hard work begins. It's kind of the least glamorous part of the process, but I love it. And I'm a very detail-oriented person. So it's a perfect fit for me, kind of shepherding all of the deals that we do from that LOI stage through to the end. Because it's really, I would say, like 3 core work streams that happen that ideally kick off right when that LOI is signed. And I would say from a best practices standpoint, if they don't start all at the same time, that time period between LOI and closing can just take a really long time. Yeah. So of course it's an art, right? It's not a science. It's different things need to happen at different times, but having a great project manager on the buyer side to really shepherd and help prioritize between due diligence, legal documents, and then the actual client transition part of it, starting to think about all 3 of those right at the start. So setting a kickoff call within a week, definitely, of signing that LOI. I often encourage the owners of the RIAs, they may be more of the business development salesperson advisor, that it might be time for them to really step aside and kind of ride shotgun to their key operations folks on the team, because so much of that, like the due diligence work and the transition prep, are so detail oriented that they still have a business to run, and often bringing in the team at that time and have them help lead that gets to a better outcome and less frustrating for the lead advisor.
Oh yeah.
Too.
Yeah. The best transitions, the best deals are the ones where you've got that amazingly proficient operations professional that knows where all the bodies are hid, can pull all the detail necessary and get it to you as quickly as possible. So let's start with due diligence, because I think that's probably the most, I would argue, the most grueling of the 3 processes.
Definitely.
Client transition has gotten a lot easier over the past 15 years. The old days of spreading out hard copy paperwork on the desk, packet by packet by packet, or client signing parties, that's all kind of gone away. Now we can use DocuSign and things like that, third-party prep companies. Yeah. But yeah, I know. But due diligence, I think that's where advisors' eyes pop open. and they get shocked. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment at explaining what that means and what sort of material is actually provided.
Definitely. Well, there's two sides of it too. I know it's always so focused on what the seller needs to provide, and that will be everything from your legal documents, your operating agreement, the SEC filings, if you're independent, then getting into all of the financials. Oftentimes with buyers, you'll have what's called a quality of earnings exercise. So they're often bringing in like an outside accounting firm even to go through and match up bank statements to the financials and make sure that everything all checks out. So it's very in-depth, a lot of details there. Then getting into your client base and really understanding the growth rates of your firm, the ages, the states that they're in, just everything about the underlying clients, how long they've been working with you, which advisors are working with them, the client experience that you employ today with your firm, and starting to build a little bit of what things are we going to want to add post-closing, but getting that groundwork of what's working today really well from a marketing standpoint, compliance manuals, just kind of hitting every category, technology, understanding the current systems that you're on today. Often there's a big lift on the technology side right around the closing to bring you up to often buyers will have a much more upgraded system that you will be able to connect to, huge benefit, but understanding what you're on today and kind of just understanding everything.
Yeah.
And I would say with that, like the biggest thing I would say is sharing bad news early,
Right.
Mm-hmm. Like don't wait for it to be asked for in a due diligence list, right? If
Mm-hmm.
there's something going on in the business, oftentimes it's easy enough to work through and, things happen and there are explanations, but getting that out even before an LOI is even better, just being transparent. At the end of the day, we're all people and want to do business with people that we can trust. And so I would encourage that too.
I think that's fantastic. I think you hit the nail on the head there from a due diligence standpoint. But I think you mentioned there's two sides to due diligence, right? Even the reverse due diligence side, from the seller's point of view, especially if they're taking a portion of the consideration in the buyer equity,
Absolutely.
right? So understanding what does that look like for them and how does that benefit them over time? I think that's also a key piece.
So explain that for a minute, Jeff, just for somebody that maybe doesn't understand what reverse due diligence might mean. What do you mean by that phrase?
Yeah, so it's really the seller doing their due diligence on the buyer. So in our case, if we were to purchase a firm, they should be doing their due diligence on us, okay? And like I mentioned, if they're going to be taking a form of the consideration in equity, what does the equity inside Carson look like today? And what are Carson's future growth plans to have that equity continue to grow? Because at the end of the day, while these business owners may be selling their business, essentially they're still an owner inside Carson. So
That's right.
I think that's another part of this transition is not only the transition of the clients and the transition of the business, but how are the owners going to transition from their current day-to-day business, but into a owner of a bigger practice, and what does that future growth plan look like for them?
Right. What's the equity valued at? What's the history of the valuation? What are your projections? Who's a shareholder? I think all those topics are so important if you're going to roll any of the consideration over into equity. Those should be on everybody's.
And even what is a liquidity event? How do they monetize on that equity? That's a big component and a question that we're often asked as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absent a big recap or something like that, are liquidity plans available along the way? If there's private equity backing, how do the preferences work, and would that impact my ability to liquidate at a current market value or not? There can be a lot of complexity. So we spend a lot of time going through with the folks that we work with, saying these are the items that would be standard to ask about, and coordinating a call often with the CFO of the buyer firm to walk through the projections and understand it.
Yeah, and it's a problem, I think, if the buyer firm is not willing to be transparent around
Yeah, it
valuation
happens.
performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
I would, especially, and maybe this is me speculating, but a smaller firm that maybe is newer to M&A, they haven't done a lot of these, or maybe they haven't used equity in the past.
Exactly.
It can be a little
Right.
bit tougher for a firm to sort of open up the books and feel comfortable sharing any of that. So how about legal? Let's talk about the process, getting to what we call definitive docs or definitive purchase agreements. How's that process typically unfold, and maybe some key milestones or things to keep in mind as you go through that process?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do recommend around the time that you're signing an LOI, or maybe even a little bit before, if you, as a seller, if you don't already have an attorney that has M&A experience in wealth management, kind of lined up to work with you, that you start to interview and get referrals. Oftentimes, even buyers have attorneys that aren't connected, aren't representing the buyer firm in any way, but maybe have worked with sellers that have joined the firm, are already familiar with the purchase agreements, that sort of thing. When you're thinking about how do I even find one that might be good, asking for referrals and from the buyer themselves is often a good path. We of course have a list that we like to work with too. But getting someone lined up that really has experience in wealth management in M&A, because there are complexities when we get to certain regulatory elements of the transaction that are really foreign in other industries. So it's helpful when they come in with a knowledge of how the client transition works, why it needs to happen at a certain time before certain things can happen, with notifying the clients and just understanding the cadence there. But then,
and Jacqueline, can I just say, because we are so aligned on this, I think if anybody is listening to today and they take one thing away from this, that would be an item I would hammer on. Have an attorney that has done this before in this space. Right. Don't use your family planning attorney or your estate planning attorney. Have somebody that does this. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah. It will cost less, because it's more efficient,
That's right.
Yes, big lesson there. I can have a lot of stories for that for another day. But so I would say that's the main thing. And then, as a best practice from the buyer side, working to deliver the first round of deal documents within a couple of weeks of signing that LOI, kind of allowing the excitement to happen, transition calls kicking off, but then deliver and starting on due diligence work, but then delivering those deal docs in a timely manner. And for a firm that maybe hasn't done an acquisition before, that will mean working with an attorney before you're outsourcing acquisitions, to get your deal documents in place and have forms ready to go that only need a little bit of customization for the specific deal, so that time between LOI and delivering deal docs can be tight and keep things moving. And I would say, as a seller, as you're going through the documents and understanding them, working with your attorney to understand how all the moving pieces work together. I think attorneys' roles are to remind us of all the ways that this could go bump in the night, and some of those risks are more likely than others. And so to be thinking through, not let those theoretical risks weigh down too much. Of course, there are risks like with anything, but having a sounding board, as you're hearing those things, have live communication with the buyer to talk through it. We're noticing this in the document. This is how this would play out. Let's talk it through.
Right.
There's an element of, now you're a shareholder of a larger organization. There are components of these legal documents that make your equity, the buyer's equity, more valuable or less when they go to recap. And there needs to be consistency through the documents. You need to understand how it all works too. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think it's great advice. I think one of the things we've found to be not a roadblock, but a delay to the process is getting the actual breakdown of consideration. So if there are multiple shareholders of the firm that is selling, it's not just one person that owns 100% of it. what percentage of that is going to whom and in what way. So what portion is in equity, what portion is in cash, who does it go to and when, because oftentimes there's an upfront component, there's a retention component, there's a growth payout, oftentimes 3 years down the road. And then also just the allocation of goodwill. If you could maybe just really high level, we're gonna have an attorney on next month talk about this more, but
cool.
From your perspective, what does that mean? Because I think that's where folks need to think through, how are people getting paid out? And we need to know that in anticipation of sending the first draft of the purchase agreements out, because we fill that in. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a quick moment to talk about it.
Definitely. So I would say in all of the transactions that we do, paying 100% of the purchase price at the close isn't something that's done, right? Typically between, call it 50 and 80% of the purchase price on the business today is paid at a closing. And the rest of it being held for, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, kind of depending on certain unique factors of the business, would be held for revenue to maintain over that period of time. Generally, that would be the structure. So what you're saying there, and I was immediately thinking about situations where there may be multiple partners in a business that are on different career timelines. So when you think about a purchase price that's, call it, 80% in cash and 20% in equity, and that cash being paid over a period of time, say a partner that's looking to exit, they may be looking for more cash sooner. A younger partner may be looking to have most of the equity, and taking that time we do a lot of work with multi-partner firms to help them think through getting the right mix for each person. And typically from a buyer standpoint, they're paying one price. As long as all the partners agree, there should be a lot of flexibility to allocate things accordingly. And so you're not going to get a lot of pushback from a buyer usually, but amongst the partners, selling partners themselves, working through their priorities and splitting it accordingly, that can be tough. But I think always the baseline is, how is the ownership set up today? And that can always be the default too. If you can't come to terms on something, then we just kind of default to that. And then maybe think about if there is a growth earnout component of the valuation, that maybe that leans more towards the advisors that are planning to stay in the business longer.
Right.
Certainly if there's more equity being issued as part of those payments too.
Yeah. Jeff, anything you'd add to that?
No, I think it's just especially anytime you're dealing with multiple owners, just making sure that everyone has a clear and defined role in the whole structure. Making sure that at the end of the day, we want to meet every owner's goals and objectives. So how can we design and structure the deal that essentially hits everybody where they need to, while also continuing to incentivize them to grow? Because at the end of the day, we want to be investing in firms that want to continue to grow. So how can we step alongside them, make sure that they can continue to do that, but structure it in a way that they're all meeting their goals and objectives?
I always appreciate how your team will take that time to really unpack that and be flexible on the deal structure for a given situation. So you don't have like a standard way to do it. It's always really with the end goal in mind and build it right from the start.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right on the fact that most firms, you're not going to see 50-50 ownership with the exact same age amongst the two partners. Even if they are the same age, they might have different timelines. We talked to an advisor last week that made the comment. He said, I'm from a relatively small town. All my clients are my best friends or people I've grown up with, or the kids of people I've grown up with. Said I can continue to meet with my top 30 or 40 best friends and clients until I'm horizontal. And there's truth to that. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about this business, is that you can continue to do it as long as you're in the right frame of mind and you're enjoying it. So his time frame is going to look different than somebody that says, hey, I want to be to use your most recent vacation. I want to be in Costa Rica drinking martinis and margaritas all the time. I'm going to be out of this in 3 years. So I want as much in cash as possible. So it changes people's outlook and how they take consideration. All right, so let's talk about client transition. That's the third leg of this heavy stool. What's that look like? And we mentioned real quick that it's so different than it was 15 years ago. If you could maybe explain that a little bit more, and I'll jump in too.
Definitely. Well, I think technology has helped so much in this aspect, and custodians are really step up their support, certainly for national acquirers like Carson Group, where you have a dedicated team that will really come alongside and support the internal Carson team, the local team, and having that, they've really dialed that in over the years. So from the custodian paperwork perspective, a lot of that can be docu-signed if needed. If the client's already set up to be, like there's already a history established of them signing electronically with you. But when it comes to the investment management agreement, that's where it can be just such an array of options. And a lot of it is dependent on the client agreement that is signed, that is in effect today. So if you're, for example, working with a corporate RIA, as an IR registered rep of that firm, then you wouldn't be able to do a negative consent process, for example. But in the independent RIA space, however your agreement is set up today, negative consent, positive consent, whatever it might be, your options are somewhat dictated by what the clients have already signed, but it's also a discussion point with the buyer too, based on what's allowable, but also within their framework. So like to be specific, it may be that your agreement is set up to do negative consent, but all buyers will want you to, even if you did a negative consent process through the transition, which is often viewed as an easier way to get through that consent process. Post-close, you'll still need to go back to your client and have them sign all clients need to be on a standard investment management agreement. You think, the big firms that have done dozens and dozens of deals, compliance departments, we need to have unification of the investment management agreement. So at some point in that next year, you would be going back to clients to have them sign the new investment management agreement. And oftentimes we have sellers that, they definitely know that their agreement is set up for a negative consent, but after hearing, after understanding, I will need to go back to them and kind of do this all again. It's really like 2 steps, and maybe it's just easier to move straight on to the investment management agreement, the new one from the start, and not go through it twice. So it's trade-offs, but a lot of it is dependent on how the client is set up today.
Yeah, and it's a great point. We prefer positive consent, and it also depends on the state. There are 8 states right now that don't allow for negative consent. There's always positive consent. So California is an example. You always need to approach the client, get their consent before those agreements can be assumed or the accounts can be moved. And we have found for most of the sellers, to your point, they like getting the work done. And when we tell them, as long as your data is okay and can be shared with one of our third-party providers, they're doing the paperwork for you. It's not the old days of going through fillable PDFs or, God forbid, actually printing out paperwork and filling it out by hand. They're getting it all ready and loaded and set so that on day one, when you affiliate and we close the deal, you become part of the Carson family or whoever is buying the firm. We're sending those DocuSigns out for you so that you're not spinning your wheels and waiting. And they'd much rather get that work done in one piece so that post-close, they can focus on why they made the change and having conversations with clients or growth or tapping into marketing or using the new technology, whatever it might be. But you're right, there are trade-offs. And it can delay the transition a little bit to get the work done on the front end, depending on what the consent period is. But you are going to do that work at some point. So having to do that inside of the first year in a more scattershot approach might not be the best solution.
Yeah, Michael, I would just add, I think from a seller's point of view, this is part of the reverse due diligence is ask the seller or the buyer, what does the transition process look like? I know from speaking from a Carson perspective, we have a great transition process that's a project management approach that we can walk you hand in hand along the way, as well as hiring third-party consultants to help populate that paperwork to make it just really easy for you and your team. So ask those questions, because that is oftentimes one of the biggest concerns is what does that transition process look like, and how am I going to message this transition to my clients?
Yeah, that's a good point. A quick shout out to Brad and Tanner and Nick and Mike and everybody on that team. I mean, we have an unbelievable team. I'm biased, clearly, but
no, you are.
they're really,
really
good
do.
at this. Yeah,
we see a lot.
They're great at it. And there's a lot of passion. I mean, they want to see the best outcome for the seller. They're excited to tell the story and bring them into the family. So having a good team behind you and working with these offices to actually get the deal done is so important. All right, Jacqueline, we're at 40 minutes right now. What are any like horror stories you want to share, or like best practices or learnings over your career that people don't talk about that they should be talking about? It's up to you.
Right. I would say just like general guidance for particularly on the seller side. I mean, but it does happen on the buyer side too, but not letting emotions get the best of you through the process. You know, it's a long process. We think in our best case scenario, from intro call with the buyer to a closing, it can be at least 6 months maybe, like if everything's moving at a great pace, and there's a lot of time in that window to see the boogeyman where there isn't one, or hear something and you misunderstand, and I would just say, leave the communication lines open. When you're hearing something that doesn't add up, talk about it, either directly with the buyer or with someone else that you have that trust with, because there's going to be elements in, the items that we talked about today, the legal documents, just the transition, how the integration will go, that like there's a lot of change that's happening, and it's a big milestone. We call it the freak out moment. All the clients that we work with, they're at some point it will happen, and we're there ready for it over the weekend, whenever it is. We know that it will happen because it's a really important milestone, and sometimes there is a problem, sometimes there isn't, but getting the concerns out on the table, having an open dialogue. Both sides want a happy family on the other side of it, and I think going back to just most people are good people and assume positive intent and just talk things through would be my
if somebody's only having one freak out moment, then you're doing things right. Because it is not, I've made the joke before, it's not like changing dry cleaners. I mean, this isn't just, I'm not going to work with you anymore, I'm going to work with you, or here's my business. Sayonara. It's a hugely emotional process. This is, in many cases, the single biggest asset that folks have spent their entire careers building. They are rightfully looking to monetize on that asset and want to leave their clients in a better place than they were before. And with that comes really significant responsibility for the buyer. And we are usually telling folks as they start this process post LOI, we are going to have freak out moments. We are going to have road bumps and issues, but we promise you that we are going to solve it from a spirit of partnership. And that doesn't mean that everything's going to be just a straight no from us. And that's not going to be, we're not going to always get our way. You're not going to always get our way, but we're going to figure out the perfect solution and the one that makes the most amount of sense from a risk and a client experience and all of those things. And I think as long as you have faith, both sides of the table, that is the approach going into it, then you're going to get through those freak out moments, because there will be that. I mean, they will always be there, always. And sometimes it is an irrational freak out moment. It might just be, hey, I'm really coming to terms with the idea of selling a business that I've spent 30, 40 years building, and I just need to talk through that with somebody. So I think that's a area you guys really shine, is being there for the advisor when they hit that moment, and being a more an objective third party to that freak out moment, and being able to sort of help communicate that to the buyer. So we appreciate that. And thank you for it. All right. Any last items that you want to talk about in the time with us? This is our first time having you. We're probably gonna have you back again because this world changes every year. But
Alan would love to as well. So
well,
definitely
good.
look forward to it.
Good. We might have to have Alan on
great.
next time too. Well, Jacqueline, thank you so much. We appreciate you being here, and just thanks for the work that you do. I'll just say again, if I had a business I were selling tomorrow, I would hire a firm like Alaris to represent me. You guys do a terrific job. So thank you for the work you do for the advisors. And Jeff, any last thoughts? Jacqueline, any last thoughts?
No, I just say, Jacqueline, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. We're happy to have you join us. And like Michael said, we will find another time in the future to definitely have you back on again.
Thank you. Yeah, looking forward to working on a deal with you guys soon too.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jacqueline.
Right. Bye.